Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, friends, only few remarks about, shall we call it provisionally, philosophy of semiotics. And when I use the term phenomenology, it is again for convention's sake. I'm not going to talk about history of semiotics as history of any branch of science. It is utterly boring. So let me start with something which I find essential. Still, two words about, as it were, theoretical history of semiotics. I remember that even at the heyday, early triumphs of semiotics, there were complaints of the type, oh, that's okay, but where is its theory on the application? It was applied to literature, to poetry, even to history, with its historiographical consequences, to card games, to dinner rituals. Extremely interesting, very lively. But the problem of underlying theory still was lurking somewhere in the corners, not yet manifested. And it is not manifested even now. Why was it so? Because the beginning of semiotics coincided with absolute domination in the world of science, of humanitarian science, absolute domination of the idea of binarism. Everything is binary. We are living in the world of binary oppositions. We are living in the world of binary differentials. We are living in the world of binarism. And when the first attempts of broader applications of semiotics began in Paris, in Moscow, in Tartu, even in Chicago, it became quite evident that we, well, I'm terribly sorry that I must say we, because I, for my sins, participated in it personally, yes. Still, few words about possible theoretical foundations, a bare binarism in semiotics as well as in theoretical physics. Some physicists told me never was enough for a real theory. It is too poor. It is, in the end, and now it is quite evident, too boring to continue into the third and then into the fourth millennium with binarism. Enough is enough. But I am returning to the idea of theory. Ladies and gentlemen, believe me, for heaven's sake, theory is not something you can extract from your pocket. Theory is not something that you can easily appropriate or even imitate. And that mania of application destroyed some invaluable possibilities of creating the theory. But the most difficult thing about theory, you cannot extract it from your pocket, from your hat, from your mouth, even from your brain, yes, is that a real theory can appear only as the result of very long reflection and self-reflection. That is what I mean when I use the term reflection. You are not only doing something with one or another object of your investigation. It is not reflection. It is the thinking, scientific thinking, artistic thinking, aesthetical thinking. Reflection starts when you start checking, controlling your own thinking on those objects, not those objects themselves. And without that reflexive thinking on what you are thinking, on what you are doing, on what you are talking about, that, shall we say, objectless thinking, concentrated on your thinking, only such a thinking, the culture of such a thinking can result in a kind of theory. So let me start with some elementary presuppositions of semiotics without any critique. Ladies and gentlemen, I hate critique. Any critique, even so-called famous self-critique, I hate. All of us, I'm sure, all of us remember the famous article by, indeed brilliant essay, and in fact a book by Levi-Strauss, The Raw and the Cooked. And even such a brilliant mind, undoubtedly, as Levi-Strauss, far more brilliant than those mass and arts of fashionable semioticiens Parisiens who started imitating him. But you know, even Levi-Strauss could not become aware of the fact that that opposition itself, of the raw to the cooked, is very raw opposition, not properly reflected and theoretically thought upon. Why? Because it is enough to reread this article without any, shall we say, sentimental predisposition, to see that what Levi-Strauss called the raw was cooked too, because that very binary opposition was a result of utterly refined cultural perception. But there is one other very interesting point in that binary mania. And the point is that the raw is not only opposed to the cooked as one cultural phenomenon to another, but what was omitted by Levi-Strauss and his followers, including ourselves, of course, because it was a heyday, you know. It was a kind of a time of temporary triumph of semiotics, which damaged the semiotics very much. As it damaged very much even such a, shall we say, even today fashionable branch of science as theoretical physics. Richard Feynman, one of the real genius of the 20th century, used to repeat, well, less of triumph. The more triumph, the more stupid we physicians become. Quite. And again, what is very interesting, that binary opposition almost annulled our possibility of thinking of some phenomena as, well, yes, shall we say, more or less cooked, milder, softer, more thought, less self-assurance, less optimism, more carefulness. And one other very interesting moment in that scientific inebriation. The thing is that overriding binarism resulted and still does result in ontologization, in series of ontologizations. Now, let us start with the simplest example. Culture. Because, in fact, Yuri Mikhailovich Lotman was absolutely right when he said that all applications of semiotics are applications to culture and to ourselves as specimens of culture. We do not and we cannot apply semiotics to anything but culture. That is, we apply it to that which has already been created by ourselves. Or we are applying to our own conceptual schemes and conceptualization created by us. And as my friend Smirnov put it very lucidly and clearly, one of the main postulates of semiotics is that the man creates culture, not a culture, not the culture, but culture. Culture with any article. And then that very man creates various conceptualizations, explaining to himself his creation. There is no raw, only cooked. We can do nothing about that. And let us not try. So the second presupposition. Sign. Semiotics as a branch of science investigating signs, systems of science, various ways of organizing science in systems, and culture itself is presented in semiotics as a kind of gigantic combination of science together with users of science, together with all ways and instruments of using the science in one way or another. I think that universality of semiotics has at its foundation the idea of sign. But what is the first field, the first sphere where signs are realized, are manifested, are investigated, are generalized, and become aware of signs. And so we are coming to the third, shall we say, ontological entity without which no semiotics is possible. The entity which in fact becomes the most important. The idea of text as universal. Culture, sign, and text. Everything in one way or another is culture. Culture is thought of in terms of signs. Wherever there is culture, there are signs. Starting with our own brain mechanisms. Forget about brain, please. It's a sheer fantasy. Okay. Anyway, but let us come to the third idea of text. So, culture, of course, is always a kind of combination of texts, variety of texts, a mass of texts. Text is given to us as a kind of artificial tool with which and by which culture is presented to our eyes, to our minds. And that is why the very term text began to be used universally. Text of everything. Text of culture, text of politics, poetical text, text of human behavior, text of ritual, text of everything. But, ladies and gentlemen, each and every universal category is very dubious philosophically for the simple reason that it is universal. A real science can deal only with that which is a result of a certain kind of differentiation or discrimination. So, text was at the beginning something concrete and specific. But we ended up with ideas like text of thinking, text of imagination. And if text can be text of anything, as a scientific notion, it must be entirely thrown out and forgotten, because it has already lost its specific and concrete meaning. And it is here that we may remember old Hegel. I do not like him, but nevertheless, he was quite a philosopher. And he used to say, I know I am the most abstract philosopher in the universe, but real thinking can be only concrete. And the most abstract notion becomes meaningful. I'm finishing to quote Hegel, meaningful only when it appropriates, when it acquires some absolutely concrete features and parameters. Now, what, in my opinion, and parameters. Now, what, in my opinion, in fact what unites semiotics with phenomenology. You know, the main thing in phenomenology is, of course, that it presents the universe as universe of objects, of phenomena, which exist only in its actual or possible reduction to some most essential points which cannot be given to us phenomenally. But that is so because phenomenology, in fact, was created by Kant, and is one of the varieties, probably one of the most fruitful variety of neo-Kantianism. But returning to semiotics, is there such a phenomenon? I am returning to three main, I would call it almost ontological or strongly ontologized entities of semiotics, of possible semiotical theory: sign, culture, and text. But is a sign a phenomenon? Definitely not, ladies and gentlemen. Sign is something which, shall we say, which waits, which aspires for its phenomenological description, but it cannot be described, strictly speaking, phenomenologically. We may only glimpse on some still remote possibilities. And the first theoretical possibility I see as a kind of attempt to establish side by side with sign one other absolutely necessary idea. I'm very sorry, how much time is left for me? 5 minutes, yes? 5 minutes, thank you very much. Sign, as I think of it, cannot exist without that which is not sign or non-sign. It is absolutely necessary complementation, without which no semiotical theory can be created in future. I remember as some 30 years ago, I wrote one article. Even today I like it. It was, I must say, moderately stupid, but still I adhere to it in some of its points when I say, well, what if imagine that each and every object, from the point of view of semiotics, has such a quality, such a property as signness? Can we operate with that quality without its directly opposing to another quality which is non-signness? And even today, I think it is impossible. I think that, shall we say, the first ontological premise of a possible theory may be construed and constructed something like, well, of course, we see that signness, but there are a lot of objects possessing of non-signness too, which means that we cannot see them. And that, shall we say, unseeingness of something in the objects we are trying to investigate, subspecies semiotica is a kind of absolutely prerequisite. So, the same with text. Text, in my opinion, in a purely phenomenologically speaking, must be de-universalized. If everything is text, then it is uninteresting. Then we do not know what we are investigating. So we have to single out a special category of cultural objects, which may be, for convention's sake, called non-texts, and which cannot be converted even in our boldest imagination into texts without some series of very complicated operations, which in my, as far as I know, has not been formulated. And finally, again returning to culture. Culture is, in my opinion, one of the most dubious concepts of semiotics. Again, for the same reason. That's what I started with, quoting Lévi-Strauss. Culture has become, again, universal, particularly due to new, absolutely stupid fashion, like global culture. Yes, one American scientist, a complete idiot, of course, you understand it, says cosmic culture. Yes. But it is not a mere stupidity, it is a catastrophic lack of reflection. To study, to investigate, to experiment, yes, but never to reflect. And so we are finding ourselves in a new prison of cultural concepts and of cultural ontologizations. Ladies and gentlemen, my little, very little paper now is by no means a warning. I'm deadly optimistic character. Yes? I think that semiotics can develop and will develop and become something interesting or even very interesting again, but in a completely new form and in possession of a completely new kind of theory, shall we say, quasi-phenomenological theory, which would reanalyze, recheck, and probably re-establish some of its classical premises formulated at the beginning of the 20th century and universally applied in the middle and even in the end of the 20th century. Thank you very much for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. Опять начал болеть. Ничего болеть.
Да?
А можно вынуть?
Там, вынем.
Да. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your culture.
Нет, for my non-culture.